being on the podcast. This is very exciting for me. But before we talk about Britches and how you have resurrected the brand, I have 10 rapid fire questions.
All right. First off, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Pleasure's all mine.
It's my first podcast.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is awesome. All right. These questions are asked to everybody. These are the same questions.
All right.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
Beach or mountains? That's a tough one. Especially if you look in some of those places.
Mountains.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
PC or Mac?
PC.
Really? Mm-hmm. That's surprising. East or West Coast?
East.
Kramer or Costanza?
Kramer.
Superman or Batman?
Batman.
This is okay. This is the one people have a tough time with.
Okay.
I don't understand why. Kardashians or Osbournes? Which reality family do you love the most?
Osbournes, if I had to pick.
Okay, well, there you go.
Come on.
That's the nature of this thing.
Yeah.
Gotta pick.
Yeah, Ozzy.
Awesome. Love Ozzy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I didn't know, in planning this podcast, I didn't know where to start because Britches of Georgetown and Britches Great Outdoors are, to me, iconic. And they were hugely popular, what would you say, from Pennsylvania down to like Georgia?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking a lot about this. Back then, it was kind of a regional iconic brand. I think it would have been a national, international brand, but the internet wasn't the internet back then, which is an interesting kind of dichotomy with what you're doing now because you're all over the world now because of the internet. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the heritage of Britches. Tell my audience what is Britches Great Outdoors.
So in 1967, if you look at clothing in the 60s, it was a massive revolution among everything else, music. So in the 60s, gave birth to Ralph Lauren, Britches, Vans, Calvin Klein. I mean, a lot of the brands we know today were birthed in the 60s.
Yeah.
North Face is another one. Britches started as the slack shop in Georgetown. A couple 20-year-olds, no money. They would self-describe as having no idea what they were doing.
And this was Britches of Georgetown. That was that
turned,
official?
The slack shop turned into Britches.
Okay.
Slack Britches,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Which was suits, upscale clothing, ties.
And for the millennials that are listening to this podcast, slacks are pants.
Slacks are pants. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So what happened was they had a huge consumer base that wanted casual clothing. So they started selling jeans. That turned into a sister brand called Britches Great Outdoors, which was the casual clothing side. That exploded.
Yeah.
You had a period, late 70s, 80s, which was the birth of prep. Clothing historians will say prep started in Georgetown. And this is penny loafers without socks, polo shirts, needlepoint belts, all of that. What happened is, you have the polo pony, you have the alligator, you have all these animal logos appearing on polo shirts. The crew at Britches, to kind of poke fun at this preppy uniform, thought of the ugliest animal they could think of to put on a shirt as a joke. So they came up with the Warthog. It kept selling out.
Yeah.
So the Warthog became this brand identity of Britches Great Outdoors, which was the anti-brand. Or in the 80s, they called it preppy with a middle finger. And Britches became this experimental house for clothing.
But does it go deeper than that? Meaning, like, you kind of referenced it. So in 67, Ralph Lauren was just starting, and J. Crew was in the Gap, and all these
Gap,
brands.
That's another one, yeah.
But you had mentioned earlier, they were all buddies. Is that how?
Yeah, most of them were. The founders of Britches were friends with Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren was selling his ties to Britches. He would drive down from New York, literally with a trunk full of ties. And I'll give you some examples. The American flag that started appearing on clothing in the 80s, that was a Britches creation. Ralph Lauren co-opted that.
Huh.
So did J. Crew, other brands. So in those early days, Britches was at the forefront of blending preppy with funk, with punk, with surf. With it was the what they never could explain. It just happened organically. It was one of those rare stores where dads and their sons would shop at the same store.
Yeah,
they could both find something.
But in that time, I guess the historians will go back and look at Britches as kind of the founder of this stuff.
Yes.
So polo shirts.
They didn't invent a polo shirt. That was Izod.
Okay.
Lacoste.
So that was the first.
That was the first. It was all the pushing of the boundaries from like they didn't invent the Oxford, for instance. They didn't invent the flannel, but it was pushing these boundaries.
Yeah.
It was taking something and pushing it into different categories. It's like, you'd look at a flannel. A flannel was, workwear,
on the tractor.
On the track. They took it and pushed it into casual and then funk and then, saying, okay, how can we, funk this up a little bit? It was all of those, like putting a Warthog on a polo. And then traditional polos were a little thinner cotton material. Britches made theirs several degrees thicker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It became known as this, tough, lasts 30, 40 years clothing item.
Was the Britches polo shirt, did that precede Ralph Lauren's iconic polo shirt?
No.
Okay.
No. They were putting the Warthog on the polos in reaction to
almost like
in spite of saying, okay, now all these animal logos are appearing on prep wear. Let's put some hideously ugly animal on it and see, as a joke. And they put it right in the front window, and they just kept selling out. And they were like, and you were talking about regional. At its height, Britches had 133 stores. It felt like that was our brand. That was our anti-brand, for first DC area and then grew from there. Like, no one else has this.
Well, we talked about this many times. For me, growing up, Britches was... So it's interesting. For me, it encompassed who I was, right? Like you go to like a Ralph Lauren and that's who you are. You're just like, that's who you are. Like, how would you, like preppy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But with Britches, there was a little punk rock with the prep. There was a little surfer with the prep. There was, and a lot of brands today are doing that.
Yeah.
A lot of brands. Yeah. Like we talked like Aviator Nation or Heller Brothers.
Yeah, Heller Brothers.
A ton of them.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, and maybe historians will see it differently, I think Britches was in the forefront of that.
Britches was and you think about Britches, it had founders that started with suits and ties, mixed with a whole crew of younger people who were in the buying and designing department.
Yeah.
So it was that interesting mix, plus the time, 60, starting in the 60s, growing into the 80s. You're absolutely correct. That's kind of the genesis and their willingness to push. I'm sorry, we're closed.
Oh, my bad.
That's all right. I'll lock that, sorry. Let me do that real quick.
It's a hometown store. That's why we love it.
I know.
But they were really at the forefront of mixing cultures, clothes, and the surfers could come in here, and this, the preppies and the punk rockers, and it kind of It was a big melting pot,
That's
especially
it.
in Georgetown.
In Georgetown, you think about the environment, the time period, and their willingness to push boundaries and try things.
I mean, I would go to Command of Salamanders and Britches on the same day.
That's it.
And
that's it.
It's kind of not unheard of now, but it's just like
Sam Goody to
exactly. All that stuff.
Exactly.
So you know, a lot of people have wondered, because a lot of people, certainly in the DC metro area, and you know, you said 130 stores.
Mm-hmm.
It was they went away very much like the Baltimore Colts left.
Yeah.
Baltimore.
Yeah.
What happened?
So in the 90s, you started to see a lot of consolidations of brands, particularly in clothing. One other quick thing about Britches, there was always a concentration on quality and price. It would have been very easy to become a brand because quality was first. That was job one. To say, okay, we're going to start selling shirts for $85, $100, $120. And they could have. They could have become that brand.
Yeah.
That was never, it was almost religion to say quality, never absurd prices, and we're going to experiment. So they got sold to a conglomerate of what they call mall brands. They own like Nordic Track and these other brands. Then it got sold to Guess Jeans.
Did it really?
Yeah. And
they probably didn't know what to do with it.
They didn't know what to do with it. Guess one of the attractive points was Britches, again, had 133 stores of prime real estate. And they had a rabid fan base.
Oh, yeah.
And just like you said, these other brands buy it and don't know exactly what to do with it. And it just got shuttered.
Yeah.
And then you ended up with this mad dash towards cheaper clothing that was constantly changing directions, chasing fads. You look at what Banana Republic used to be to what they are now. And that whole period in between was just chasing fads, but as opposed to staying true to that root.
During that time, also was that the emergence of fast fashion,
exactly,
where the clothes weren't put together that well.
Quality didn't matter anymore. It was all about you look at what happened to Abercrombie and Fitch, what they used to be towards going towards the tween market, 100 miles an hour. So that's what really the 90s, early 2000s turned into, was these storied brands just chasing fads. And again, cheaper clothing. Yeah.
Well, the one thing that I think we need to really talk about was just how loyal Britches shoppers were. They loved it.
Yeah.
It was kind of a lifestyle, not just a brand.
Yep.
And as a brand, you can't wish for anything better than that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a shooting star right there.
You nailed it. Exactly.
What do you think that comes from?
It's fascinating, and they'll never, stop being. They'll never cease making case studies on these things of how you create that. And most of the time, it's just organic.
Yeah.
It wasn't forced. It wasn't trying to be something. It just happened. And it's a mixture of the time, the people, listening to customers, and the fearlessness in pushing boundaries.
Yeah.
Pushing things. Admitting when something doesn't work, when something does work, understanding, trying to understand why, and see if you can push it even further without copying.
Yeah.
That's without copying or trying to be something you're not.
Yeah.
If all that.
Well,
makes
so
sense.
speaking of copying, let's talk about the rugby shirt, the classic rugby shirt. Tell me where that came from, and is it safe to say that Britches brought that to America?
Yeah, that's the story. So there were variations on rugbies, This is where it gets complex. People will say, well, it's a long sleeve polo.
It's not.
It's not.
I have a long sleeve polo.
Yeah,
it's nothing.
It's not.
Nothing like it.
Then they would make thicker long sleeve polos. They would change it. what happened was some of the Britches crew was in England
Mhm.
on a buying trip, and they saw a rugby shirt. They literally saw rugby players in a bar wearing this,
Off the field.
off the field, grass stained, muddy, and we're like, oh my, thick cotton,
Because it would have to.
it has to be tough,
Yeah.
brutal,
Yeah.
double placket collar. So they talked to these rugby players, and they ended up buying one and bringing it back, and kind of just fell in love with this thing. And then went about having it made with some tweaks that were very Britches tweaks, the classic famous rubber buttons.
Yep.
A kind of improved collar that made it a little more casual, and introduced that in the 70s, and it just went crazy. So every rugby that you see, Ralph Lauren copied it, J. Crew copied it. You name a brand, they copied that rugby. And they say, in the 80s, they sold 18 million plus units of that rugby shirt.
Yeah.
It became known as the rugby. It was the model for the rugby, and it's been copied many times, but it's never the same.
So I think that's one. I mean, so it's interesting. Britches is, if you lived anywhere between Pennsylvania to Georgia, but certainly in the Mecca Center of Washington, D.C. metro area, Britches was in your blood.
Yeah.
And it was something that you couldn't necessarily define back then. I can define it now looking back at it, but it was just this thing. It was a culture. It was a movement. Really well-made stuff that was cool, hip, fun. And when I started talking to you about all this and hearing what role it played in just fashion as we know it today, I mean, we talked about Ralph Lauren and all these guys, quote unquote, let's just say borrowing the concept of the rugby. I mean, that's the reality of it. But even so, they were all, it's like friendly rivalry back then, right? Between all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think it's okay to say, didn't Britches bail out Ralph Lauren at one point?
Yeah.
What's the story with that?
There was a loan made in the 70s. Ralph Lauren is famous for pushing boundaries and taking big risks. And in the 70s, he needed a loan. So the Britches guys, he came to them.
Yeah.
And they helped him out. That's how close knit a lot of that world was. Hyper competitive, but at the same time, there was a mutual respect.
Yeah.
Because they were the ones, again, I know I keep using this phrase, but they were the ones pushing boundaries and reinventing what a clothing company was.
Yeah.
That it wasn't just your traditional model of walking into a department store to buy a shirt because you needed a button-up shirt. It was, let's introduce new things, new ideas, new colors, new patterns that before would have been considered hideous.
Yeah.
Britches, another famous one is the ugly shirt, where they just took patches that in any normal world would never go together. If you study
Patches of plaid.
Patches of plaid. They're taking different patterns and different colors that any color scientist would say those should never be on the same garment, and calling it the ugly shirt, and it just kept just selling.
Calling it what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So you think about a clothing company before that actually calling a shirt making a shirt ugly,
yeah,
and then calling it an ugly shirt, that's
so that's the thing. As someone that helps build brands for a living, I look back at Britches, and it was more than just a place where you got clothes. It was buying a statement that when you walked out the door, you were trying to convey that message and statement to people.
Yeah.
And it started with, it wasn't until I realized why they picked the Warthog. It was a middle finger of hey, this is who I am.
That's it.
Kind of thing. I have this ugly shirt. I have the cool T-shirts. Everything, and I hate to overuse this word, but to me, everything was just iconic. So it disappeared. Years go by, there were several attempts to bring it back, right?
Yeah, there were offers made. Companies like Eddie Bauer, et cetera, made offers to bring the brand back. The original founders knew that it wouldn't be organic. It wouldn't be for love of what it was.
But they brought the rights back to
the founder, Rick Hendon, once it was shuttered, bought the licensing back.
Okay.
Which was a smart move.
Yeah. Okay.
And then 20 years go by.
And you walk in the door. Tell me how this happened.
Yeah, so a mutual friend who I didn't know knew the founder of Britches. I was making these blazers. And he said, would you like to meet the founder of Britches? I said, you kidding me? Let's go. So we met for lunch in D.C., and I asked what happened to it first, and he kind of went through the story, and I said, we got to bring it back. Yeah. We got to bring the Warthog back. He goes, yeah, I've had offers and this and that, and I said, well, I'd like to, I'm serious. Like, this isn't just casual conversation. So that night, I sent him a term sheet, a draft term sheet, and in a matter of days, we signed a deal.
But what was this is what amazes me. What was your background?
In the quote unquote clothing business, zero.
Well, what made you think you could run such, not even just a clothing brand, but like a really popular brand that you knew? Well, I mean, you knew people were going to have been waiting 20 years for this to come back, and you knew what a microscope you would be under by even attempting this journey.
Well put. Yeah.
So what made you think that this, like, you could even do it?
I never stopped to think about, the idea that I couldn't do it. I was keenly aware that it had to be done right. There was no room for error in terms of quality and everything.
Well, can I pause you for a second? What did Britches mean to you for you to even want to get involved in this?
So this is what I conveyed to Rick. Rick could see right out of the gate my passion for it. In middle school, it was Britches or nothing.
Yeah.
If the shirt didn't have a warthog, your polo shirt had anything but a warthog, you were a poser. You know what I mean? You were trying to be something. In fact, my parents dug up an old letter where I was trying to ask them for a clothing allowance that I broke down item by item, and every item on the list was either a Nike, Adidas, or Britches. And I actually itemized rugby shirts. Like, that's how deep, it went. Anyway, so I conveyed that to Rick, the passion for it. This isn't just a business idea. This is a true passion.
So it meant something to you to have that Warthog on it, like me.
Absolutely. And I never stopped to consider. I know nothing about the clothing business or retail. I never. So
you jumped in the pool, didn't check for water.
No.
Didn't have one of those floaty things under your arm,
No, nothing. Nope.
All right, so you guys do the deal.
Yeah.
Did you have that moment of, oh, crap?
I didn't have that moment of, oh, crap, until I started ordering samples from clothing factories.
How did you even know how to do that? Did you have anyone that kind of walked you through, like, helped you out?
Zero.
So how did you know, like, who to call to get?
So prior to that, I made blazers. Men's blazers that were funky. They're made of duck cloth. They have these funky elbow patches. And I made a few hundred of those.
Are these the ones that, like, literally, the elbow patches are made from, like...
outdoor cushion fabric.
Outdoor cushion fabrics.
Nothing about this blazer makes sense. It breaks every single rule. Of
what is that connection?
Correct.
There you go.
Exactly. In fact, a funny thing, I wore that blazer to the meeting with Rick to show him, like, oh, he's going to be impressed with this thing I made. And he goes, that's an interesting choice with duck cloth. I said, yeah, it's waterproof, stain-proof. He goes, yeah, that's an interesting choice. I said, I can make you one. Do you want one? He goes, no, I'm good. I was like, okay. I'm not impressed with this particular.
Well, you must be a great salesman because you overcame that challenge of hating that jacket.
My one example of a clothing item I created was not, No, I didn't get scared until I ordered my first samples. So, I researched clothing manufacturers, fabrics I wanted to start with. I had no idea how to develop a size chart. So I start ordering samples from different manufacturers, and they come back as a shirt, but there's a feel that you cannot explain.
Yeah.
That's different from just going to Gap or something and picking up a Oxford. I was getting shirts back that felt like you just went into a shopping center or a Gap, and which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not Britches. It didn't feel, and I didn't know how to convey it, understand it. Then I went on this mad mission of buying a men's button-up shirt from every manufacturer out there.
Yeah.
And laying them out and dissecting them and figuring out what, and of course I still had original Britches stuff that I could point to and say, So I really went into a obsessive period of understanding clothing, fabrics, construction, terminology, so I can convey to the manufacturers. And then...
Was it a lot of YouTube watching?
Oh my goodness. YouTube, endless reading. And I got better at learning to convey things to the manufacturer and the mills. And you start to whittle down to your core manufacturers. You learn the ones that just aren't going to get there. You can't push them to make it better.
Right.
They have their way of doing it. Which leads us to today, where I'm working to create a U.S. manufacturing base for our clothing, which has a long tail to it. We'll get there piece by piece, but
that's great.
Yeah, that's where I want to take this ultimately.
Yeah. Did your wife think you were crazy?
Yeah, she thinks I'm crazy anyway.
Still,
she knows who she married.
So, at any point in that R&D time, did you tell anybody?
No, I was.
No one knew.
No, I couldn't tell. Let me add a critical piece to this. We started with button-ups, Oxfords, moved into flannels. The rugby, back to the rugby, is an essential Britches item. I knew there was no way I could tackle that by myself. A guy by the name of Anderson McNeil was part of the original team. Anderson came into Britches in his 20s. A lot of the items we know that are he was part of. Wow. A key part of.
Yeah.
So I contacted him, and he jumped right in. And so when the rugby comes out this weekend, it has that original, team behind it.
You said how things feel, and I touched the prototype a couple weeks back,
mm-hmm.
and I don't know how to describe it either.
Right, you can't.
No,
you can't describe it.
I'm not ragging on any other, but it's fast fashion, right?
Yep.
So you go into a store now. My daughter's going on 12, and she just became acclimated to a store forever blank,
mm-hmm.
and you touch it, and it's just like, well, this won't last a
yep.
season.
Yep.
Like, this is going to be, destroyed by the end of this month.
Yeah.
And when I held that rugby prototype, I don't know. There's a couple things that are happening. One, it immediately takes you back. That touch and the feel takes you back, because they don't make clothes like that anymore.
They don't.
And I know I'm dating myself or sound old-fashioned, but they just don't make clothes that way anymore. So there's a quality element to it. There's a textual, tactile element just with how it feels.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at the rubber buttons
yes.
and the collar, and just
it
took me back. But the biggest compliment I can give you is, so we should probably talk about this. My best friend since the first day of 7th or 8th grade, which he was wearing a Britches rugby. And I told you, I had on my green, green pants and my pink shirt and my dog siders. And he was
coming
upset.
in strong.
Yeah, he didn't like me at first because apparently Julie Wood looked my way.
Okay.
Hi, Julie.
That's right.
Julie's down in Miami now. And neither one of us dated her. So
Okay.
joke's on her, I guess. Sorry. I mean, it takes you back. So he contacted me, I don't know, months ago, sometime maybe late fall, I think maybe, and was like, hey, you're never going to believe this, Britches is back. And that's been going around the D.C. area. Yeah. We're in Warrenton, Virginia, which we'll talk about why you're here and why the comeback story's here. But I posted something on my Instagram story, and then you responded, and we were talking one night. I'm like, I don't know how I can fit in, but I need to be a part of this Phoenix story coming back. And then I'm like, so who am I talking to? I was like, I'm the owner. I'm like, this is crazy. So you captured it. And I don't know how you did it because you don't have a clothing background besides we'll show those in some B-roll, those jackets. But I don't know how you did it, but you did it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That means the world to me.
So the biggest compliment I can give you is that same post that got your attention. A friend of mine from Portland, Oregon reaches out and goes, hey, where's that?
Okay. And
I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, where can I get that, whatever it was, like the shirt or something? I'm like, have you heard of Britches? He goes, no. Because, D.C. is such a transient area.
Yeah.
So the Britches lore has reached across the country and the world because people just move out of D.C. and travel. But so I just assumed, you have one foot firmly planted in the past and that heritage. Mm-hmm. But then you're moving into the future as well. And I'm excited for you because now that you have the internet, right now you have one store in Warrenton, Virginia, which is a
very small town of
hour and 20 minutes outside of DC.
Yeah.
Rural area.
Yeah.
A lot of pastures and animals, livestock and stuff.
More cattle than people.
More cattle than people. Mm-hmm. And would it be safe to say this is kind of like a soft open store? We're testing things out here. Product.
This is our template.
Okay.
We started online, and it quickly occurred to me, when you sell something online, which is great, I don't hear from the customer. I don't get any feedback.
Yeah.
It sells. If it gets returned or exchanged, 1% of people leave a comment as to why. So I had to open a store quickly with this phase one of the return to learn from the customer. So in the beginning, every single call to customer service came to my cell phone because I wanted to talk to every single person. I wanted to learn. I didn't tell them I was the owner. I just, every single comment of everyone that comes in the store, I need to hear to understand if I'm doing this right, if it feels, if something's off, something's not right. I need to know everything.
What's been the feedback?
Incredible.
Nostalgic?
Thankfully. Nostalgic. People coming in, bringing their kids in. An attorney said he's redoing his entire wardrobe in Britches. It's been phenomenal. The criticisms have been incredible as well. I take every single one and say, okay, we need to do this different or better. So it's been great. One thing that's been kind of hilarious is the impatience. Like, okay, Britches back. Where's that polo? Where's that rugby? I want this. Where's the Henley? Remember the Britches Henley? Where's the Henley? And I'm like, it's coming. It's all coming. We can't do everything at once. We got to. Each piece has to be right. As we go. And I'm impatient too. Trust me. And I have to stop myself from being impatient to make sure each thing is done right. And the funny thing too is, I working with the manufacturers and the mills, we've learned to work with each other. Them learning right out of the gate. I know nothing about the business. I have no idea how to communicate things like people in the industry. And in a weird way, that's been good because I can just use like normal adjectives to say. No, and then they kind of, in an interesting way, get into it too. Like, oh, you want thicker, you want heavier, you want softer, I'm like, the flannel, like this isn't, I go into flannels and I learn about brushed cotton and how they brush it and this and that. Can you do it twice? Can you run it through the, and they're like, yeah, we can try that. And it becomes kind of fun on both sides. Like,
Yeah.
all right, let's push this a little further. And, I went through a weird week-long odyssey on buttons. Like, these buttons aren't, and they're like, what do you mean the buttons aren't? I was like, I don't know. I can't. So
there's
you go through bags of samples of buttons, and then you have to put them on the shirt. You can't just touch. You got to put it on the shirt and see, Anyway,
I think it connects
a lot of rabbit holes.
It taps you into the bloodline of why Britches was started in the first place, and that attitude, because they didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
And so I'm a musician, and specifically a guitar player. And there are two types of guitar players. If you really kind of boil it down to this, ones that are classically trained, went to class, know how to read music, know all the scales, the variants of scales. And then there's people that just pick it up and taught themselves and fell down the stairs and landed.
Right.
You can tell those.
Yeah.
Not by watching them. You can tell by
That's a good point.
hearing
Right,
them.
yeah.
And it's been my experience, my favorite guitar players are the ones that found their own way because they have more soul. It's that soul that's driving them. And the classically trained guys don't have that soul in their playing.
They're not copying someone else's vibe. They're creating their own because,
Yeah. Or it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Like those classical trained guys, like the Steve Vais and the Joe Satriani's of the world, they're like perfect players. But that's not what our ears want. We want
a little grit. Yeah.
And that's what Britches has.
Yeah.
And somehow you captured it once again.
Well, thank you. That honestly means a lot.
So what's next? We have the rugby coming out.
A lot of stuff. Yeah.
5 years down the road, what does Britches look like?
So this is a template, this store, for us to learn and get it right. The goal is to move into historic college towns. This time we're not going into malls. We're going into historic college towns.
Like vibey areas.
Exactly.
Which, by the way, Warrenton is. It's a cool little town. Was this fair to say this is the historic strip?
That's it, yeah.
So there's my favorite restaurant right next, two doors down. Yeah. There's a cool coffee shop there, but there's it's a really cool
It is.
town.
It's a funky little historic town.
Yeah.
2 breweries, couple bars, great restaurants. And I was born and raised here.
Yeah.
I love it. So this has been a great experience. We want to take this model as we get better at it, move it into historic college towns, and here's a kicker that I can't explain. If you walk into a clothing store, I go to the beach, I walk into a clothing, it would never occur to me in a million years to give the employees of that store criticisms or ideas for what they should do next.
Yeah.
Never. I would just say, okay, there's nothing here for me. I like this one shirt, check out and leave. With Britches, it's so familiar that most people that come in are either just, going crazy to his back and then they'll immediately say, where's this? Where's that? Are you doing this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's like, it's comforting. It's like we're all in this together. I don't want to sound cheesy, but it's so true. And then I love it. The employees that work the store love it. The emails we get, the comments we get, it's like this isn't my brand. This isn't, it's almost like a collective ownership and stake into this thing.
Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys. The Cowboys, I mean, they're my favorite team, oddly enough, growing up in DC. But he always said it's such a brand, and it's America's team that he's not the owner. We all are the owners.
Right.
He's just kind of the caretaker from now until that changes. And I think that's the role that you're playing.
It is.
Are we allowed to know? Well, I'll say this before I get into possible locations, if you are up to discussing that.
Yeah.
The handful of times I've been here, it's been the coolest part about, well, first of all, the coolest part about it is walking in, and it's a time machine. Not in a dated kind of way.
I hear you.
Not in a dated way.
Yes.
But like, I'm home.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that.
But then my favorite part, getting past that, is being in the store and hearing and watching other people walk in. Now, the last time I was here, a lady maybe in her 60s walked in, and she was acting the same way I was. Yeah. And then there was someone, a teenager came in one time, and it was like, oh, that's a really cool shirt, or this, that. So it's trippy, because it feels like the movement of yesteryear.
Yes.
Not in a dated way, but like the origin. Listen, not too many. So this podcast is all about like how brands and people make waves, and they're, and it's really difficult. If a brand goes away, it really never comes back. Yeah. And if it does, it's a shell of itself. Yeah. Somehow you have been able to capture, and I hate to say this one, what is it going to be? I'm going to try to have this be the last time I say it. An iconic brand that meant so much to people.
I don't get tired of that. It is an iconic brand. Yeah, there's no better way to put it.
But you've captured that lightning in a bottle again. And as someone that brands for a living, I'm just mesmerized by it.
Thank you.
Because it's just, I don't know how you did it.
That honestly, I know I keep saying it, but it does mean the world to me, because it took me a while to understand. And this is going to sound cheesy, forgive me, but obviously Britches is a business. Yeah. We have to make money to grow and add items and all that. Aside from that, it's more than just making a shirt, designing a shirt. The shirt has to, I don't know how else to describe it, but it's like a Disney thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that
like an expectation?
That spark, that little piece of magic, you know what I mean? And it took me a while to realize it has nothing to do with me. I put all this pressure on myself because this has to be done right, and that pressure remains. And there's sleepless nights, wondering if I'm doing this right. But what happened fairly quickly was it took on a life of its own. It took me a while to understand that this isn't, I'm not creating this. Yeah. Like you said, I'm a steward of it. And it makes no sense, and I cannot describe how that's happening. I'll give you an example. When we first opened, we recreated these funky windbreakers. They're about as 80s.
These guys?
The red, white, and blue ones in the other room. And I can't say I necessarily designed it. It kind of just happened. There's a discussion back and forth, talking, and it just kind of came about, and it says Britches on the back collar. And we put them in the store for opening weekend. They sold out immediately. These high school and college age kids and middle school kids were coming in, buying them left and right. And then the very next day, one of the kids would walk in with 3 of their friends, and they're everywhere. Right. And we had people driving up from Richmond, and this one comment struck me. This guy drove up from Richmond. He saw it opened. Someone shared it on Facebook. He canceled his meetings that morning. Drives an hour and a half each way to the store. And I'm glad I was here when he came in to talk with him. And he said, stores like this don't exist anymore. And I said, what do you mean? And he couldn't describe it. It was driving me crazy and driving him crazy at the same time. He couldn't put it into words, but I needed to, again, learn. I needed to understand what he was referring to. And it just kind of stayed with me that
I had to go to Home Depot yesterday.
He couldn't explain what that meant, but
I went to Home Depot yesterday, and nobody wanted to come with me. I usually can talk the kids into coming because Home Depot has like a really good candy aisle right in front of the register. And I was gone for a while, because it's we're still in Corona time, and it's nice to get out of the house.
I hear you.
In a car.
That's right. It's an escape.
So I come back, and I'm pulling into my driveway, and there's my 11-year-old daughter in that windbreaker that you're talking about.
Nice.
And over there, shooting her with a hose, is my son with the... Can I say
prototype? Yes, the prototype.
It's the prototype of the rugby, and I just pulled in, I'm laughing, going... It's happening again.
You just went into a time machine and came back with that.
But it feels so good. See, the thing is, though, I've said a couple times, not dated. You have this balance of, I'm looking at the t-shirt wall over there. It has a foot into the origins of it, but then there's this newness to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this perfect balance, you know? And it's Britches is going the same place, but in a new direction all at once.
Yeah.
So where can we expect Britches stores? Like, can we talk about specifically what cool vibey towns?
Yeah, so on our radar next is Charlottesville, Richmond, ideally store number 4 back to Georgetown.
Okay, because everyone's been wanting to know what's up with Georgetown.
Yeah, Georgetown's been in communication
since
it was announced. So that's a absolutely has to happen.
What do you think that'll mean to that area to have Britches back in DC?
And if I can cuss on this show, to come back to Georgetown, when that happens, I mean, you got to have your shit together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, we're again growing, learning piece by piece, getting the house together. When that happens, the return to Georgetown, everything has to be in place and buttoned up, ready to go. A lot of inventory. We've really got to have the system in place. What it means to Georgetown. One Britches customer who contacted us, say he was a customer since the 70s, said when we came back and he bought his first shirt from the return, he said he instructed all of his friends and family every Christmas, birthday from now on, this is where they're to shop. I said that means so much to me. And he said, "Are you coming back to Georgetown?" I said, "We will be." And he said, "I will cry." So, he was being serious.
Throughout this
he will break down and cry when that. Yeah.
Throughout this conversation, I keep second guessing myself of, am I explaining that well enough? Because I'm trying to convey this to people that live in the middle of Texas.
Yeah.
Like it was a huge thing that meant a lot of, I'm trying to think of like other brands, and I can't really think of one that meant so much, that was so huge and iconic, even if you didn't realize it. Like, again, the rugby shirt, or the polo shirt, or the Henley.
That was the other thing. That's what they became referred to as. It was simply the rugby.
Yeah.
The polo.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't have to say anything else.
Like wearing I found a picture, I didn't bring it, I had to send it to you, of my American flag rugby that was diagonal. Remember that?
Yes.
It just meant so much to people, and it had such an impact on the fashion world that we know now. And I'm just glad, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so
it's been fun. It's fun.
As we wrap this up, what's been your most favorite mistake that led you to a breakthrough?
Excellent question. I got to think for a minute. Okay. The thing no one can really wrap their head around is the size chart for men and women. It's, one brand's large is another brand's XL or medium. Mm-hmm. It's all, sizing is all over the map. There is no standard. I wrestled with that endlessly. Our first versions of shirts are sized different than the ones we sell now. So, again, it goes back to listening to the customer, every word. Women came in and said, these are size small. Younger women came in and said, these are size too big. I was like, okay. Anyway, guys came in and were saying, okay, this shirt's great, but I have to go up a size for my belly. But then the shoulders are baggy. The top's baggy. Mm-hmm. So I kept playing with it, cutting shirts up, re-sewing them, and we developed this shirt that's now called the Dad Bod. That is regular up top.
Is that
Dad Bod's over there?
Okay.
It's regular up top, but then, and people started flipping out. Like this fits perfectly. Like, and it's a women buying a shirt for their husband get a massive kick out of the fact it's called the dad bod. Dads with dad bods have such a sense of humor about it. Their kids get huge kicks out of the fact that it's called the dad bod shirt. So that was a accident that us just trying to figure out the size chart.
Yeah.
Again, going back to knowing nothing about clothing, I bought every single size of a men's and women's shirt from Gap, Ralph Lauren, all of them, trying to dissect this thing and figure out. And there's no rhyme or reason to
like
it.
literally reverse engineer these shirts?
I measure them shoulder to shoulder, arm, chest, hem, everything. And I put together just on paper, with grids. Okay, here's, this size chart. And I said, there's got to be some median I can find where it points us to, and there's not. There's not. It's all over the place.
So this goes back also to you've never had any clothing experience.
None, zero.
So you own a tech company.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Like, how did you talk your partner into this?
Oh, he
like all your friends think you're crazy?
Oh, they think I'm great since day one. Yeah, my business partner and I, we've been in business together for 20 years. Nothing surprises them.
Okay.
Yeah, I've run down many tunnels, gotten lost, come back screaming. We have each other's back on that. So no, this was no surprise to him whatsoever.
So speaking of that, as an entrepreneur, what is, I always hate to say one, but like what is a piece of advice that you could give an entrepreneur, someone building their business, that, what's some advice for them?
So
especially if they have no idea what they're doing.
Right. Years ago, I was asked to speak at a high school. And I said, what do you want me to... The high school I graduated from.
Okay.
I said, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, well, just business. Kids would like to hear. And I was like, I don't really... First of all, I don't feel like I know much about business because I make more mistakes than anything. And I'm thinking, what can I... And it hit me all of a sudden. The thing... I used to read biographies in high school and college about like the Carnegies and the Henry Fords. And the thing I could never get a handle on was the A to B. I understand how they got from B to Z, right?
Yeah.
But the A to B is generally glossed over in business stories, and so how do you go from having no money, but you think every idea you have is brilliant, right? How do you get... So I said, I know how to do that now because I've done it numerous times in business. So when I got to the school, I said, that's what I'm going to talk about. And I told the students, it's just start. When I started SiteWorks, my first company, I had a note card of 3 things I needed. I needed $200 because that was the minimum you needed to open a business checking account. I needed a domain name, which at the time was, $26. And I needed business cards. And the minimum, they would print business cards for then was $75. So I had this list, I needed, basically $300. And I was working at a bank then as a, customer service rep. And I'm just trying to save up this $300 so I can get these 3 things. And I got the 3 things, just, literally, no joke, read HTML for Dummies, to get a website stood up. And then just start knocking on doors trying to sell websites to people. So my point to them was, you think you need less to start than you think. The trick is to start. So if I were to start a clothing company with no money, I would start with the same list. Okay, how much does it cost to get a prototype made? Right? Boom, boom, boom. What's the minimum order quantity for that? And I would go save that amount, working odd jobs, doing whatever I had to do, and then understand that you're going to mess up way more. You're going to screw up way more than you get things right.
That's not talked about.
But that's the beauty of it. And this is the other thing I tried to get across to them, is that's honestly the beauty of it, is you learn way faster and you don't forget those mistakes, but every one of those mistakes pushes you an inch further. And if you can appreciate that kind of marathon,
that's one thing that when I'm asked those kind of questions, we don't talk about failing that often.
No.
And, it's one lesson I try to teach the kids now is failing's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
So, at the dinner table, I'd rather ask, what did you fail at today? And it sounds bizarre, but what went well today? Because everybody, you could string a couple of good days together for things that went well.
Yeah,
Like, I always try to impress upon the kids, well, you don't remember this, but you felt like, how do you know what the edge of your crib was?
Right.
You have to fall off first.
Right.
And then you go, oh, so if I go that far, that's not good.
That's it.
Or, touching a match or, anything in life. We just take that for granted.
Yeah.
But I think that's most impactful in business is that it's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
It's actually great.
It's
to make
good.
mistakes.
It's important. And
if you don't beat yourself up over it.
Right. And the weird thing is to try to get across is they're not really mistakes.
No.
It's building.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you have to make those in order to. I mean, gargantuan companies have made mistakes. New Coke, for instance. But if you really look at that example, they redid their entire formula, put massive amounts of money on the line to launch New Coke. It was a dismal failure. What they did was launched back Classic Coke. And sales went through the roof because everyone realized what they missed, including Coke themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Is that a failure? Not really.
It's all how you look at it.
It's all in how you look at it. It was a massive building block, a massive learning experience. Not only that, other companies get to look at that and say, it's actually discussed now in business school.
So I believe things happen for a reason. And oftentimes if you're really disappointed or downtrodden because something bad happened to you or you made this huge failure, I like to think, well, you should just buckle up because it's a way of making way and room for this next thing coming down. Like that really matters. I always think of the Post-it note at 3M.
Yeah.
That was a mistake.
Right, exactly.
The damn stuff wasn't sticking.
Exactly. Ivory soap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, what's coming down the way? So we have the rugby coming out.
Rugby coming. Yeah.
The polo, is that coming back?
Polo's coming back. The old school heavy. Yeah.
Okay.
That's in production. Henley, we're working on a collaboration now with Champion.
Okay.
Because Britches back in the day had that Champion relationship. That's coming back.
What has been the response of these other iconic brands? The Carhartts of the world, the Champions of the world.
Yeah.
What?
It's fascinating. A number of these brands have reached out in a cool way.
Yeah.
We spoke to a guy at Carhartt, and he said something fascinating. Because immediately my head goes to, oh, we should collaborate on something. And he goes, no, what you're doing is right. You're on the right track. He bought some of the clothing. He said, I love it. He said, at Carhartt, we have a saying, that's not our grill. And he said, you know how you can tell a Ford, Chevy truck grill from a mile away? At Carhartt, we know who we are. We do it very well. That's our grill.
Yeah.
The collaboration that's not our grill. I said, that is a cool corporate kind of mentality. Understand what your grill is, Yeah. But yeah, to answer your question, we've had a number of brands reach out, which has been fun.
And they're taking notice.
Oh yeah. And it's been fun, having those conversations. And it's in a way kind of like, well, welcome back to the arena.
Yeah.
It's like a friendly, but at the same time, you're in an arena. You know what I mean?
You're sitting there asking, why are they asking this question about what kind of, where we get our buttons from?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's fun.
Would you say maybe they're a little nervous?
I don't know if I'd go that far yet, but absolutely keeping an eye on things.
Yeah.
Which is, we're the little guy, the really, really little guy.
Yeah.
That has massive potential and what could be a huge road ahead of us.
Yeah.
And these brands, they have been in this arena nonstop, since the 60s. And some brands, like your Vans and your companies like that and your Champions they're approaching it completely in a welcoming way.
Mm-hmm.
Other brands are like, all right, suit up.
We need to put a Vans collab together.
That's on my radar. Believe me. Vans is one of the coolest companies on earth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same vibe.
Yeah, same vibe.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So I was going to ask this question: where can everybody find Britches? But it's all right here.
Yeah, those are social channels. The website is warthog.vip, which is a funny one. Being in the tech business, people are like, "Why'd you get VIP?" And I was like, sounds cheesy again, but again, back to this is a community, not just a business. That we all get VIP. There's no special login for the VIP section.
I didn't even know there was a .vip.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah. That just kind of organically found itself too.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's been great.
Well, I'm excited for you. I know that everyone that's going to listen to this, well, there's two. There's people that are going to listen to this because they want to know what's next, mm-hmm. and they're just thrilled that you're back. But I think that people around the country are going to see this brand and find it familiar, even though they've never purchased a Britches item before.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see what's next.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome.